So hi, Christophe. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. And I would like to start telling about your side, about your business and what you're doing for so many years in neuromarketing and brain science, and tell your story and what value you bring to your customers.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me, Raphael, to have an open conversation with you today. I have been a consumer researcher my entire life. I've been CEO of companies, I've been chief marketing officers of companies, and anytime I would do a market research project, I always became somewhat suspicious at what my customers would be able to tell me about what they want and how they feel. And if you look at market research in general, even today, 95% of the dollars spent understanding customers are used to fund dialogues with customers. And here's the problem with being able to talk to customers. We have very obvious limitation as humans in terms of what we can communicate. And we lack words. We have, for instance, nearly 60,000 emotions, but only 6,000 words in English to describe them. We have shame, we have pride, and so there are things we're willing to share and others we're not. So as a market researcher, I became very frustrated and decided that I would have to find a way to bypass, to avoid talking to customers, to find out, to decode why they make certain decisions. And the best science available next to marketing was neuroscience, because by looking specifically at this organ, I can measure specific neurophysiological responses that are not conscious for the most part, and therefore cannot be communicated. Whether it's where the eyes are going and for how long, eye tracking, whether it's the moisture on the skin or brain waves. What neuromarketing has done for 20 years is add methods that go beyond what people can share.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so I know that you wrote. I mean, it's actually like a life project with you and your affair with neuroscience and neuromarketing. And I know you wrote a few books about it, and you actually have developed a system which is like a technical system that explain and that helps. I mean, maybe you can present it even better than me. So what's your system for marketing and understanding how the human brain works?
So you suggested the book. This is the new book. And for anybody interested in understanding how especially advertising is affecting our brain, I recommend our book called The Persuasion Code. In the book, what you will learn is a message, whether it's a website, whether it's a packaging, whether it's a commercial, whether it's even a presentation that you're listening to. A message has a path in the brain. In other words, it has a point of entry and a point of exit. And what we have been able to do in my company for about 20 years now is we've been able to identify what that path is, and we teach this around the world, and we consult companies to help them optimize their messages for the brain. Now, it takes more than a few minutes to explain the entire theory, but if I show you again the brain here, and this is half of it, you know that the higher level here is called the cortex. This is the most evolved part of our brain. This is why we can communicate and talk right now. We use language. Even though English is not your native tongue, it's not my native tongue, we have the ability, the skill to speak this advanced language. But underneath the cortex, which we call the rational brain, because this is where we can be quite logical and factual and do some analysis, predictions, especially in the frontal lobe, the visual system, which is one of your interests as well in the back. Underneath that, you have a more primitive but fundamental part of our brain called the primal brain. It includes the limbic system, which is a set of neurons that are in circuitry that is managing our emotions. And then right underneath, you have the brainstem and the cerebellum. And these structures basically make us alive. These structures manage our capacity to breathe, to digest, they control our blood flow. Most of what are called the neurotransmitters, these chemicals that allow neurons to communicate with one another, are produced in the primal brain. And what we discovered in our research is the primal brain is still controlling how messages are accepted and processed initially in our brain. So the path is from the primal to the rational.
I know there is this book, not of yours, but of what's his name? I think David Canahan, or about thinking fast and slow, and about messages.
That's right.
Receive. Can you explain more about that and how it relates to what you're doing?
Sure. And so, again, put things in perspective. In 2002, when we first published this one book here that was quite popular around the world, it's in 13 languages, we were the first marketers to suggest that to be successful in advertising, you have to first and foremost consider how your message is going to be accepted and processed by the primal brain. Now, understand that saying that means the primal brain is pre-verbal. The primal brain doesn't have very sophisticated neurons to do math and computation. The primal brain has zero interest in complexity. The primal brain is mostly visual, very selfish. Survival is the #1 objective. So we were really throwing a big kind of shock to the marketing community. And then 5 years later, this gentleman, a psychologist called Daniel Kahneman, published a book in which he basically described that two-brain system and said, you know, as an economist, I have studied how people make decisions my entire life. I now have to admit or accept that we have two brain systems, one that is very fast, the primal brain, and one that is rather slow, the rational brain. And the conclusion of a very actually difficult read, but managed to got him the Nobel Prize in economics, is that the primal brain, or system 1, as it is also called, still rules our decision. And so this was a beautiful gift, basically, that we got 5 years after the publishing of our first book, that really made the theory of two brains more accepted and more mainstream around the world.
Wow. Okay, so could you tell more about we working together, me from Feng-GUI and you from SalesBrain? Could you share with our viewers what kind of value you're getting from using Feng-GUI system as part of your consulting?
Of course. So given my interest in the way the primal system works, and understanding that the visual system, again, is basically hosted in what's called the occipital lobe. So it's a big, big part of our brain. A lot of early visual processing, however, is directly controlled by the primal brain. And this is something that most people don't quite understand. The connection, in fact, of the optic tract from our eyes to the brain is right here, directly in the primal brain. So I've been very interested in visual processing for a long time. I do studies that involve eye tracking devices that are recording actual human eye movements and pupil dilation, but it's rather slow and rather expensive to do that. And so when the technology that Feng-GUI is offering became available, I was extremely excited because it was a way of modeling or predicting the early impact of visual stimulation. And to me, the early impact is still mostly controlled by the primal brain. And so I've been using it for several years. We use it to very quickly but very effectively create early assessment of how a message is visually organized. And so it's been extremely, extremely successful for us to use this. Have evaluated competing platforms, and I think Feng-GUI is by far the best that I've ever seen in the world.
Wow, thank you very much for
All
your
deserved.
yeah, we've recently got not certification, but like credibility from MIT benchmark for our claim of 92% correlation with eye tracking, with traditional eye tracking. They have this benchmark that they give you like the images, and you run your analysis on them, and you send them the results, and then they compare your results, your predicted results, with real eye tracking of real people. So our claim for 92% correlation for the first 5 seconds with 40 participants, viewers, has now been credited by MIT, which is probably the best university in the world.
That's fantastic. And again, we probably have scanned hundreds and hundreds of images. And what we do on top of the results that you provide is we're able to further explain why the map are the way they are. And so as you know, just scanning an image to figure out if certain objects or elements are effectively salient or not salient, that's great. But being able to explain and start recreating this image to improve its impact, particularly on the primal brain, to improve the visual narrative function. As you know, our human brain is very efficient and always seeks to understand a story. And if your visual are just a collection of objects that do not have an obvious narrative, that visual is not going to capture our attention for more than just a second or so. But what we know is if the visual is constructed in a way that tells a story, then those visuals are going to have good saliency and good impact on people's brains.
Eye tracking and computational attention like Feng-GUI cannot work alone without a person like you and an agency like SalesBrain that can interpret the result and bring that value to the advertiser.
Yes, and I'm sorry if I keep going back here because I'm thinking now, this is my latest book. It's a guide in which I do talk about your platform, but I talk about electroencephalogram, functional MRI, and as you just said, it's rather clear that to fully investigate how our brain is responding to a website, a commercial, you have to, if you can, you have to combine methods. And so your method is critical, but if people are able to combine, predictive eye tracking with decoding of facial expressions, monitoring of brain waves, all those methods give you another layer of insights that might be very valuable.
Yeah, okay. So I would like to thank you very much for this interview and for sharing your, maybe just a tip of the iceberg from your knowledge, and anyone who wants to get more details, I write down at the bottom of the video.
Sounds good.
A few links about SalesBrain agency, and also, of course, about the books that those bestseller books that you published about neuromarketing.
Yes, and Raphael, I should note that you and your company and SalesBrain have developed an additional platform which is proprietary, but is giving a chance to people to go beyond just the visual report, and we can begin to look at the quality of the story behind the visual, and that platform has been developed by Feng-GUI and is a very promising extra feature and extra level of analysis that was just introduced a few months ago. So I'm really excited and very looking forward to promoting this joint venture, in a way, this technology partnership between SalesBrain and Feng-GUI.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very exciting, and that's it. Good luck to us and to our viewers as well with their neuromarketing analysis. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Raphael. Bye.